to the participant themselves or other people, because it helps us develop research studies to test these experimental treatments. So one type of observational study is natural history studies. And what they do is they follow how the condition changes over time. And that's really important for when we design clinical trials, because we want something to compare to. We want to know that a drug is working because we want to compare it to what happens when someone doesn't have access to that drug. And when we have really good natural history data, that means we can sometimes use it in place of a placebo or a sugar pill, so that we don't have to have someone who's in the control group on the study and doesn't get the experimental medication. Some types of patient registries are also a form of natural history study, because they ask participants for updates on their clinical information. So the NF Registry is actually a form of a natural history study. And another type of observational research is what we call case studies or case series. So when a clinician or a researcher reports in the literature about an interesting or a new finding in someone that has a condition that maybe hasn't been seen before, that's really helpful in us just generally understanding the disease better, so we can learn more about how it affects different people. And then we can also use that information over time to develop treatments. So how do you find research studies? There's a couple different ways to do that. One is clinicaltrials.gov, and that's a public database that shows both observational and interventional research studies, so clinical trials, as well as things like natural history studies or patient registries. And that's hosted by the NIH. I have a little picture of what the screen looks like when you go to their main page. You can search by whatever your condition or disease is. For example, neurofibromatosis type 1. You could put additional information. For example, if you had heard about a drug, or you heard about a particular company that was doing something, and then you can put your location and what country you're in. You can choose to search for all studies, so it'll show studies that may be completed in the past and have information available, or you can select recruiting studies. And when you look up a study on this database, it gives you actually a lot of information, including inclusion criteria, exclusion criteria, so you could see if you maybe fit what they're looking for participants, what they're aiming to learn in the study, and what they're doing, whether it's a medication and how that medication is being given, and what the time commitment is. It also gives you the locations, as well as contact information for someone who's a coordinator for the study, and you can reach out to them for more information. Patient registries are also a great resource for research studies. I'm going to speak about the NF Registry in particular. For those that are not already on the NF Registry, we're getting really close to 10,000 participants, so I highly recommend that you add yourself to the Children's Tumor Foundation NF Registry. Benefits of the registry: it is a natural history study, so we are learning about NF over time. It's also a way to get connected with research. Researchers use the NF Registry to find potential participants for their trials and their research studies, so you might get email notifications that there's something that you might be a good fit for. It's also, they send out updates about what's happening in general in research. So it's a way to kind of be in the know. I also want to mention that the NF Registry was updated in the past month. So it's actually been moved over to a new platform. So for those of you that are already in the registry, the new platform has all of your information from the previous registry. You don't have to do anything extra, but it's a little bit more user-friendly and easier to use. So hopefully that will be helpful over time. Also, the privacy for the registry now on the new platform is still very secure and meets all of the requirements for both North America and Europe. I also want to mention another website called researchmatch.org. ResearchMatch is another way to find clinical trials, and what it involves is filling out a questionnaire about what kind of studies you're looking for and what types of symptoms or conditions you have, and it'll see if there's anything that comes up that looks like you meet the criteria for. It'll also send you notifications if something comes up in the future that's a good match for you. You can always check any of the social media or the website for the Children's Tumor Foundation for updates on what's going on in NF research, as well as asking your NF provider, particularly if you go to a clinic where they do research and clinical trials, then you might be able to learn about something that's happening local to you. I want to pause briefly to see if there are any questions as we just introduce clinical research before I turn it over to Dr. Sate. Looks like we don't have any questions. I'm going to give it a moment. Okay. So if we don't have any questions,
Kara, looks like there's one there.
Okay.
Is there an accelerated protocol for off-label drugs?
I am not sure. I think when we're talking about off-label use of medications that are already approved, sometimes there are, sometimes we don't have to do the early studies for safety because we already know that they're safe and effective in people, but we can do some of those later studies. So that might mean that there's a difference in how long it takes for something to be approved for a different use. And then the next question is about medication for plexiform tumors. We're gonna wait on that question until Dr. Sate does his presentation because he's gonna talk a lot about plexiform neurofibromas and other tumors. So we're gonna wait for that until Dr. Sate's section, which is coming up next. But there is a question about entering the registry if you are outside of the US, and yes, you can do that. So it's an international patient registry. So you can be anywhere in the world and be part of the Children's Tumor Foundation registry. So anyone, anywhere can be part of it. That's the beauty of the internet these days. All right.
If you don't mind, Kara, I'll tag on this assignment. So it is currently just in English, but yes, to what Kara said, so as long as you can type in English, we are looking at translating it into other languages. We hope to have that in place, hopefully later this year or next year. But back to what Kara said. Yes, please join the registry.
Okay, great. So we're going to move on to section 2 of tonight's talk. I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Samir Sate to talk more about the NF1 pathway. Dr. Sate completed medical school at the Kasturba Medical College in Manipal, India, and then completed his residency at St. Peter's Hospital in New Jersey, followed by a fellowship at Memorial Sloan Kettering and Weill Cornell Medical Center with a primary research interest in NF1 and its associated tumors. He's now a research physician working at Memorial Sloan Kettering in the Louis Parada Laboratory, in which they work with NF1 animal models, investigating drug therapies for effective treatment of patients with NF1-associated malignant peripheral nerve sheath tumor. I'm going to pass it over to Samir to take us away.
Thank you, Kara, for that wonderful introduction to clinical research. And good evening, everyone. One of the primary objectives of my section of the talk is to help you get a better understanding of the NF1 signaling pathway. And this will help us better understand why patients with NF1 develop cancers and other medical problems, and also help us understand why researchers use medicines that can help prevent the growth of these tumors and prevent the development of medical problems for patients with NF1. So NF1 is an extremely complex and challenging condition. And one of the challenges is that there are different medical problems and different kinds of tumors that can occur at different ages for patients with NF1. For instance, the children that are born with NF1 initially only have skin lesions, which we refer to as café spots. But within the first few years of life, they can also have some skeletal complications in their legs. And they're also prone to developing tumors in their nerves, in the large nerves of the body that we refer to as Flexiform Neurofibromas. And as these children get older, within early childhood and their school-going years, we can see the onset of learning problems as well as cognitive problems, such as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, for which they require special services in school. And as NF1 patients then traverse through adolescence into adulthood, they're at risk for a number of different cancers. And again, by no means am I saying that everybody develops these. And that is one of the things that we need to figure out are who are the patients who are at higher risk. But there are certain tumors such as malignant peripheral nerve sheath tumors, breast cancers, as well as gliomas. So this next slide, I'm going to talk about the NF1 signaling pathway. And I'll be going through in very detail here how the NF1 gene is important to the growth of a cell. So imagine first that this is the outer surface of a cell. Now, in order for a cell to grow, it requires food. And this food comes in the form of growth factors, the green ball here. Now, for the food to enter the cell, it requires an antenna on the surface of the cell, which we call the RTK, or the receptor tyrosine kinase. And when the food enters the cell, it triggers a chain of events inside the cell. And the very first thing that happens is that this green ball, or the growth factor, goes inside the cell and activates a gene, which we call RAS. And this is very important because what the food does is it interacts with some other genes inside the cell and converts the RAS gene from its red or its inactive form to its green or its active form. And once the RAS gene is activated, it then activates several other genes. And the important ones here are number one, RAF, which in turn activates the MEK gene, and that in turn finally activates the ERK gene, or the ERK gene. Now the ERK gene is the one that is most important here. And the ERK gene then finally goes into the center of the cell that we call the nucleus and causes the cell to grow. Now, the active form of the RAS, or the green form of the RAS gene, can also activate other signaling pathways, such as the PI3K, also referred to as the PI3 kinase, AKT, mTOR gene-directed pathway. And also there are some other survival pathways that scientists are learning about in the field. Now, as I explained before, when the growth factor enters the cell, the RAS gene gets turned into from the red inactive form to its green active form. But for patients who do not have NF1, these cells are able to turn the RAS back from its green form back to its red form. And the way they do this is by using the NF1 gene. The NF1 gene is also considered the off switch. And so once the NF1 gene converts the RAS back from its green to its red form, all of these signaling pathways get turned off and the cell stops growing. However, for a patient who has NF1, they lose the NF1 gene. So in a sense, they lose their off switch, and as a result, these signaling pathways are switched on all the time. And this results in the formation of a tumor. Now, in the next section of my talk, I'm going to be talking about the most common types of tumors that develop in patients with NF1. And
continue recording where you left off. Press 4.
And one of the most common
If
types
you're satisfied with the message, press 1. To listen to your message, press 2. To erase and left off, press 4.
Just a reminder for everyone to mute themselves. Please go ahead.
One of the most common types of tumors that we see in patients with NF1 are brain tumors. And I'm precisely going to talk about a kind of tumor that's very common, which we also refer to as the low-grade gliomas. And these usually occur in either the upper part of the brain. So as you can see, this is a patient, and these are the eyeballs of the patient, and these are the nerves that help the patient see, connecting to the back of the eye. And you can see these white areas on both sides, which represent where the tumor is located. And what these tumors do is they compromise the vision of the patient and can be vision threatening. The other most common site for these low-grade tumors to develop in patients with NF1 is in the brainstem. So this is a part of the brain that's the lower part of the brain that helps to connect the upper portion of the brain to the spinal cord. Now, when scientists have studied these low-grade gliomas under the microscope, they found that in addition to the glioma cells or the tumor cells, there's also a number of normal cells that are within these tumors that don't have the NF1 gene. And these can also include neurons, which are the cells in the brain that help us think and make us smart, as well as a number of and also a number of immune cells. And what happens is the glioma cells, the neurons, and the immune cells within the tumor all act in concert with each other and help the tumor grow. And this is important to understand because scientists have now devised strategies that target not just the tumor cells directly, but also the immune cells within the tumor and help reprogram these cells so that they can now start attacking and killing the tumor cells. So in the next slide, before we proceed to understand what the current state of clinical research is for patients with low-grade gliomas, I just wanted to first help us understand where we've been before. And so here I've created a table which shows you the name of the study, the drug that was studied, the number of patients in the third column of patients who are on each of these clinical studies, and then finally the results of the study, which is represented by the progression-free survival, which means how many patients on the study had stability in the size of their tumors or whose tumors shrunk when they received this form of therapy. And so I've arranged the study from left to right in chronological order, starting from the 1980s, going up to the early 2000s. The most important thing I want everyone to remember from this slide is that the standard therapy for patients with low-grade gliomas is a combination of these two medicines, which I've highlighted in red here, which are the carboplatin and vincristine. And you can see here that in both of the studies, this results in stability of the tumor or shrinkage of the tumor in roughly 2/3 of the patients, or approximately 69% of the patients. Unfortunately, there are about 30% of patients, or 1/3 of all patients, who do still continue to have growth in the size of their tumor or worsening of their vision despite starting chemotherapy. And so therefore, researchers have looked at ways in which we can help improve the vision for these patients who don't respond to chemotherapy. And here I'm highlighting a specific medicine called Evasizumab. So Evasizumab is a drug that is also referred to as a monoclonal antibody because it targets the growth of the abnormal blood vessels. And we think that cancer requires a large number of blood vessels to grow. It requires a large blood supply. And so because this medicine prevents the growth of these blood vessels, it essentially starves the cancer and kills the cancer. And you can see here, this is an example of a patient with NF1 who had a large optic pathway tumor or large optic pathway glioma and had loss of vision in his left side. As you can see, the gray area indicates the patient is unable to see. And when this patient started bevacizumab therapy, because he did not respond to chemotherapy, within a year, the patient's vision began to improve. And this coincided with a reduction in the size of the tumor. And eventually you can see that the patient had complete return of normal vision in that right side of their visual field. So we were very encouraged by these results. Now, just going to take just revise this NF1 signaling pathway again in order to help us then understand what are the different drugs that clinical researchers have used to target these tumors. So if we remember that the RAF gene is also a part of this pathway, and so scientists thought, why don't we use, and researchers thought, let's use a medicine that blocks the RAF gene, and the name of this medicine is sorafenib. And what did we see? So unfortunately, on this study, we found that when we use this medicine, sorafenib, which blocked the RAF gene, instead of reducing the size of the tumor, some of these patients had an increase in their size of the tumor, and the study had to be stopped early. And when scientists took the tumors from these patients and they studied them in the laboratory, they found that when you inhibit the RAF gene using this medicine, it actually increased the ERK signal inside the tumor instead of decreasing it. And therefore, this phenomenon is referred to as paradoxical activation. And so this made scientists and researchers a little bit more wary about testing drugs in human patients, and therefore we learned an important lesson that first we need to study these more closely in the laboratory before beginning human studies. Next, we tried to target a different gene in the Nf signaling pathway, and here we use a drug now called everolimus, which blocks the mTOR gene. And this study was conducted by a consortium called the NF Clinical Trials Consortium. And just to explain what a consortium is, it is basically a group of hospitals that band together and help conduct clinical trials for patients with rare diseases such as NF1. And this is a consortium that's specifically directed towards patients with NF1. And there were about 22 participants with NF1 on the study who also had the low-grade gliomas and who were treated with everolimus, the mTOR inhibitor, for over a year of treatment. And as you can see, of the 22 participants, there was one patient who had a complete shrinkage in the size of their tumor, 2 patients who achieved a partial shrinkage, and there were 12 patients where the tumor did not grow any further. So we were very encouraged by these results because, as you can see here, roughly 2/3 of the patients who were treated with this drug, everolimus, had a response to the drug. However, you can see that again, 1/3 of these patients would still continue to have an increase in their size of the tumor despite treatment with this drug. So on the whole, we were very satisfied with the results of this study, and we think everolimus is a very good drug to use in patients with low-grade gliomas. Now, simultaneously, while this study was going on, another consortium called the Pediatric Brain Tumor Consortium conducted a study with a different drug called Cellumetnib, also known now as Koselugo, which targets the MEK gene. And this is a MEK inhibitor. And there were 25 participants with NF1 associated low-grade gliomas on this study. And as you can see here, what I've shown you are the results from the study. And this is what we call a waterfall plot. And the midline of the 0 indicates that anything above it means that the tumor was growing in size, and anything below it in the blue indicates that the tumor was going down in size. And each of these blue bars represents one patient. And so there were 25 participants, and you can see that of these 10 patients had a partial shrinkage in their tumor, which is more than a 50% shrinkage in the size of the tumor, but also that all of these 25 patients had some shrinkage in their tumors, and there were no patients whose tumor grew while they were receiving this medicine. And so these results were extremely exciting to both scientists as well as researchers. And of these 25 participants, more importantly, there were 13 patients who had optic pathway gliomas. And of these, we had visual testing on 10 of these patients, and we found that all of those 10 patients had at least either stable vision or improvement in their vision. And therefore, MEK inhibitors or Cellumetnib have now become one of the standard treatment regimens for patients with NF1 when chemo does not work for these patients. So this now brings us to the future of clinical research in this arena. So knowing what we know now, clinical researchers have now designed a study through a different consortium called the Children's Oncology Group, which is actually a very big consortium of hospitals throughout North America that again band together to help treat patients with brain tumors as well as other tumors. And what we're trying to do is take all patients with NF1 who are newly diagnosed with a low-grade tumor or low-grade glioma, and they haven't received any therapy so far apart from surgery, and then to randomize them. Randomization is a process in clinical research that is used so that there is a 50-50 chance whether the patient will get either the experimental medicine, in this case the Cellumetnib, or the standard medicine, which would be chemotherapy, carboplatin, and vincristine. And the reason we're doing this study is because we wanted to ask, does the MEK inhibitor work better, or does the chemotherapy work better to shrink these tumors and to improve the vision for these patients? Now I'm going to switch gears and talk about a different kind of tumor that affects almost up to half of all patients with NF1. These tumors are referred to as Plexiform Neurofibromas. Now, Plexiform Neurofibromas are benign tumors. And by benign, I mean that these tumors do not spread to other sites in the body. They stay in the same spot that they started off in. And they usually arise in any part of the body that is associated with a nerve. And so you can develop these neurofibromas on the face, on the neck, in the abdomen, in the back, or on one of the hands or the legs. Just to remind everyone, again, the NF1 signaling pathway works, again, very similarly within these tumors as well. And so scientists and researchers have attempted to target and prevent the growth of these tumors by using different drugs again. One of the medicines that has also been used here is this medicine called Tipifarnib, which actually inhibits the active or the green form of the RAS gene. Another drug that we've already talked about is Cellumetnib, has also been tested in these patients, and I'll tell you about the results in the next few slides. And then the other drug that we've talked about previously is sirolimus, which targets the mTOR gene. Now again, before we proceed to the results of these clinical trials, I want to help you understand why researchers have used these different drugs. So when scientists studied these Plexiform neurofibromas under the microscope, they found that there's a number of different cells within these tumors. On the left, you can see these Schwann cells are the cells which give rise to the tumor, and these are considered the tumor cells. But you can see that the remaining cells also make up a major portion of the tumor and are composed of fibroblast cells that help kind of glue the tumor together. And then you also have other cells such as mast cells, macrophages, which normally function as part of the immune system to help fight off infections, as well as T cells, which also help fight off cancer cells. But you can see that these are not expected, but we see them within these tumors. So one of the ways that we can target the tumor would be to target the tumor cell itself directly. And this is what we talked about in the prior slide by using drugs which target the signaling pathways involved in the tumor cells, such as Tipifarnib, which inhibits the RAS gene, Cellumetnib, which inhibits the MEK gene, or sirolimus, which inhibits the mTOR gene. But like I said, there are also these other cells that we believe are important components and help the tumor grow. And so scientists have also tried, and researchers have also tried to target these cells. And this is a form of therapy that's targeting the immune cells and is therefore referred to as immunotherapy. So we've used drugs such as pirfenidone, which target the fibroblast cells. And we've also used drugs such as Gleevec or imatinib, which targets the mast cells. And then we've also used drugs such as pegylated interferon, which targets the T cells within these tumors. Now in the next slide, I'm going to talk to you about the results of all of these clinical trials. And what I've tried to do here is summarize the drug that we've used in the clinical trial. What is the specific target of the drug? Whether this drug is targeting the tumor cell directly or the microenvironment or the immune cell, the number of patients who were involved in this study, and whether any patients who were on these studies had shrinkage in the size of their tumors. And as you can see in the first 3 studies, unfortunately, despite the large number of patients and despite a different approach in each clinical trial, we saw that none of the patients had any shrinkage in the size of their tumors. And that was the same with the last 2 studies as well, using interferon alpha, which targets the T cells, and imatinib. And although these results were disappointing, we did learn important lessons during the conduct of these clinical studies. One of the things that we learned about and has become very important is that we figured out that plexiform tumors are very irregular in shape and size. And because of that, it makes it very difficult when we are looking at MRI scans to make accurate measurements of these tumors. And therefore, we've now developed more advanced, sophisticated techniques using 3D imaging. And therefore, we measure the tumor now in 3 different planes. So not just the length and the width, but also the height of these tumors. And that helps us measure these tumors more accurately. The other thing we also learned from these studies was that these tumors, or the plexiform tumors, tend to grow faster in younger patients and then tend to slow down as patients get older. So currently there are many clinical trials that have just been recently completed or are currently ongoing. And I've highlighted here all the drugs that target the MEK gene, and there are these different MEK inhibitors. The one that we've already talked about before is Cellumetnib in the first column here, and there were 50 patients on this clinical trial. And 70% of these patients achieved a shrinkage in their tumors. So all of a sudden, we now have a medicine that can result in shrinkage of tumors in a significant number of patients. And there are also some other MEK inhibitors, such as Cellumetnib and Bromodomain, which have also achieved a very good level of shrinkage in all of these patients. And there are some studies using a MEK inhibitor called Cellumetnib that are still ongoing. We don't necessarily understand what are the specific differences between each of these drugs, but we do know that some drugs have to be taken twice daily. Some drugs can only be taken once a day. Some drugs come only in a pill form. Some drugs come only as a liquid, and that helps us sometimes make the decision which drug to go with. And so now we've got MEK inhibitors, which have recently been FDA approved for pediatric patients or for children with Plexiform Neurofibromas. And very recently at the Children's Tumor Foundation meeting, we also were apprised, or we were informed about the results for adult patients with NF1 and Plexiform Neurofibromas, where also the drug Cellumetnib seemed to have very good effects. And so we hope that, soon this drug will also be FDA approved for adults. And then finally, I want you to pay attention to the last column, which is a new drug called cabozantinib. This is a drug that, again, targets not the tumor cell directly, but in fact, the immune cells within the tumor. And again, this drug also resulted in a very good level of response in adult patients with NF1 and Plexiform Neurofibromas, where roughly 40% of the patients had shrinkage in the size of their tumor. And now this pediatric arm of the clinical trial is testing cabozantinib as well in children with NF1 and Plexiform Neurofibromas. So now that we know where we've been, we can better understand what the focus of our future research efforts should be. So currently, the primary focus of the clinical research efforts for patients with Plexiform Neurofibromas is how can we reduce the side effects that these drugs are causing for the patients. And so what we're trying to do is to combine a therapy that targets the tumor cell, which is the MEK inhibitor, such as Cellumetnib, and combine that with a drug that acts in a different way and is targeting the immune system, such as cabozantinib. And our hope is that by combining the MEK inhibitor with cabozantinib, we can achieve a better level of shrinkage of the tumors and also lower the side effects that will occur in patients. And then finally, I'm going to talk about another tumor type that can be seen in patients with NF1, and this is fortunately rare, that is referred to as malignant peripheral nerve sheath tumors. And this is actually one of the primary objectives of my laboratory research in the Luis Parada lab at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, because these tumors don't have very good medical therapies, and therefore our lab is trying to figure out what are the best, and several other labs throughout the country are trying to figure out what is the best way in which we can approach the treatment of these tumors. So I apologize for this overcrowded slide here, but this is sort of representative of how malignant peripheral nerve sheath tumor looks like, because there are several signaling or cellular pathways that play a role in the growth of these tumors. And therefore, it has been very difficult to develop a single drug that would effectively treat these tumors. And what we learned very quickly when we were doing clinical trials for patients with MPNSTs or malignant peripheral nerve sheath tumors was that when we used only a single drug, unfortunately, none of the patients who were on these studies, as you can see, the number of patients is in this column, none of the patients on any of these 5 studies had any shrinkage in the size of their tumor. And then we moved on to doing drug combination studies using drugs such as RAD001, which is an inhibitor of the mTOR gene, and combining that with the drug that we talked about before, such as Evasizumab, which inhibits the growth of the abnormal vesicles, and so it inhibits angiogenesis. And also combining a different drug, Gantenerumab, which causes stress inside the cell and causes the cell to undergo cell death, with an mTOR inhibitor, such as sirolimus. But unfortunately, even with these drug combinations, which were recently completed, we did not see any shrinkage in the size of these tumors. So what is the focus and where are we going in clinical research with NPNSTs? So currently there are a couple of ongoing studies. The first of these is called SARC-031, which is using a combination of two different drugs by targeting the MEK gene with Cellumetnib and by targeting the mTOR gene, sirolimus, and combining these two drugs. And there's also a clinical trial concept that is being considered now, which is using a 3-drug combination, which is being developed through the NF Clinical Trials Consortium using Cellumetnib and using other drugs to help improve the effect of Cellumetnib in these patients. One of the drugs is what we call a Bromodomain Inhibitor. And this, what it does is it affects not the gene directly, but it affects the enzymes that regulate how much of the gene is expressed. And so this is called an epigenetic medication. And we are trying to combine this with medicines that also make the immune system attack the cancer. And so we're using different mechanisms. So just to summarize, we're using different drug combinations, either 2 or 3 drug combinations, which act in different ways and target multiple pathways of survival that the cancer is using. Also trying to harness the power of the immune system to attack these tumors. And you may have heard about a lot of the exciting scientific work that's ongoing using novel strategies, unique strategies, by employing oncolytic viruses such as the herpes virus, which is the cold virus, or adenoviruses, which is also another common cold virus, and using these to target and kill the cancer cells. And there are many other unique forms of therapy, which I may have missed here, but there are several things that are coming to the fore, but are not yet in a full-fledged clinical trial, and therefore beyond the scope of this talk. Now, the final slide, I just wanted to quickly mention, the non-tumor aspects of NF1. And one of the challenges that, there are several challenges that do face us when we're trying to address the other medical complications that we see in patients with NF1. And that is that, we don't have enough natural history studies. And I think Clara talked about what natural history studies are, because we want to see how these medical problems evolve over time or how they change over time, so that we can then understand whether, if we do give a medicine for patients with these medical problems, whether the medicine is effective or these things are just getting better by themselves or getting worse by themselves. And for this, we need to incorporate what we call patient-related outcome measures, or so measures that help us or that tell us how patients on these trials are feeling when they're on these medicines. And there are also very, very important questions that come up, is that what about children with NF1 who have learning problems or cognitive problems? Can they be treated with MEK inhibitors, and do MEK inhibitors cause? And so this is an area that we are currently focusing on, although we don't have an open clinical trial at this time. But there may be other ways to look at this by looking at the patients who are already on the MEK inhibitor trials and seeing how those patients did in terms of their cognitive issues or learning problems. And then we need more laboratory studies to help better understand why these medical problems occur in patients with NF1. And another big question in the field is that, can we use MEK inhibitors for patients who don't have tumors or who don't have cancers early on, so that they can be prevented from developing cancer later down the line? But all in all, I think even though we do have effective therapy, it's going to require a significant amount of effort of both time and commitment from both patient advocates as well as the scientific research community to bring these medical therapies for patients with NF1 who don't have tumors. So I would like to conclude my talk here, and I hope that I have been able to provide a basic understanding of the signaling pathway in NF1, why certain tumors develop in patients with NF1, and why we've been doing research with the drugs that we've used so far to target these tumors and other medical problems. And I thank everyone for inviting me to this forum. And I will put up the last slide here so that we can see if there are any questions from the audience.
Okay, we're just going to give a minute for some of the questions to come in through the chat. A couple questions came up during your talk, doctors say. One of them was when we do research studies in optic pathway glioma, many of us know that for some children, their optic pathway gliomas might stabilize or sometimes shrink without any treatment. Is there something about how we design the clinical trials for optic pathway glioma that can account for this possibility?
So this is an excellent question. And this is a problem that clinical researchers have grappled with over time. And what we are trying to do is, what we found is that when we do clinical trials for patients with NF1, and when we do clinical trials for patients who don't have NF1, but also can have low-grade gliomas. So low-grade gliomas can develop both in patients with NF1 as well as those without NF1. And we found that it's in fact the patients with NF1 who do get chemotherapy and actually end up doing better than the patients who don't have NF1. And that may in part be explained by what the audience member has asked this question, is that there may be a group of patients who were included who actually, the tumors were getting better, or the vision for these patients was getting better by themselves, and we don't actually need to treat these patients. And so what we're trying to do now is, in future research studies, is to be very stringent about the patients that we want to enroll on these studies, by saying that, we only want to be enrolling, or we only want to treat a patient with an optic pathway tumor when we know for sure that it's impacting that patient's vision. So if we just see some changes on the MRI, on a single MRI, we usually are not prompted to put that patient on a clinical trial or to start medicine, to start a medicine for treating that patient. But we want to rely on the vision exam that they get with their ophthalmologist to see that does this patient actually have worsening of the vision, which is what the goal of therapy is actually aimed at. And so this is one of the ways that we're trying to tackle this problem.
Great, thank you so much. There was a couple questions about Cellumetnib and cognitive function, and I want to address that quickly. For those that weren't able to join us for our June forum event, that presented some of the exciting research that came out of the NF conference in June, including a presentation on the results from the study on MEK inhibitor and cognition. So for those that weren't able to join, they can go to the recording available on the Children's Tumor Foundation website and watch those presentations. They also presented on the topical treatments for dermal neurofibromas that were presented at the last conference. There was another question related to optic pathway glioma. You had presented on that mTOR inhibitor everolimus that had shown some promise, but then there were some participants that had progression. Do you know of any plans to revisit mTOR inhibitors in optic pathway gliomas, or consider combination therapies using that medication, or is the focus really on the MEK inhibitor based off of what we've seen so far?
Again, I think that's a fantastic question, and this is a question that's being currently debated in the clinical research community. I'm just going to go back to that slide, just to highlight the difference in the response that we saw. So this is the results with the mTOR inhibitor, everolimus, and these results only recently came out. But what we saw was that roughly 2/3 of the patients who received this medicine had either stable size of their tumors or shrinkage in their tumors. So you can see that only 3 of the 22 participants had some level of shrinkage, whereas about 12 of them just had stability in the size of their tumors. However, if you compare this to the results from the MEK inhibitor study, you can see here that all of the patients, all the 25 participants on this study, had at least some level of shrinkage in their tumors. And more importantly, this study also reported on the vision outcomes for these patients. And we saw that none of the patients who were on the MEK inhibitor had worsening in their vision. In fact, there were 20% of the patients had improvement in their vision. And so I think that's why we felt that more strongly that MEK inhibitors are probably should be considered before we consider everolimus as a second-line therapy if chemotherapy is not working for these patients. And coming to the question of combining these two medicines, that is another fact. We have tried to combine these two medicines, not for patients with NF1, but for patients with different kinds of cancers that also use the same signaling pathways as the NF1 tumors do. And unfortunately, we've had a lot of side effects or toxicities in those studies. And that has kind of made us take pause before initiating a study by combining everolimus and a MEK inhibitor, because we feel that, you know, the toxicity to the NF1 patients might be too much and may not be worth the effect of combining these two medicines. And so, you know, this is still something that's being considered, but currently, because we haven't been able to achieve a tolerable level by combining the two medicines, we don't currently have a clinical trial planned that way.
Okay. And I think that's a great illustration from the beginning of tonight, where I talked about in clinical research, we're looking to see if something's effective. We're also looking to see if it's safe and doesn't have a lot of side effects. So that's a great illustration of that. There was another question asking about where we stand with Cellumetnib in adults, since it is approved for children at this time. If you could just comment a little bit on that.
You know, again, I believe there were a couple of great presentations at the Children's Tumor Foundation conference, and I think we did have a participant at the last forum who talked about the results of Cellumetnib in adult patients with Plexiform Neurofibromas, where, if I recall correctly, roughly 56% or close to 60% of the patients who were on that study, 60% of adults who had Plexiform Neurofibromas, did have shrinkage in their tumors. So the results were very similar to the pediatric arm of the study. So I think all in all, it does look very, very promising. And I think we're probably going to be moving towards approval of this medicine for adults as well, but I can't comment on, you know, how long that process is going to take. I think, you know, the people who are doing the clinical trials currently, I think, may be able to shed better light. And also, I think someone from the FDA may be able to help us better answer this question with regards to the timeline. But I think it certainly looks like this medicine is going to work very well for adult patients as well. It may just be a question of the toxicity profile, and we've seen some differences, particularly in terms with some MEK inhibitors, where adult patients seem to have worse skin rashes as compared to the children who are on these medicines. And so I think some of that data still needs to mature, so to say, before we, you know, I think have approval for this medicine for adults.
I think just to round off this section before we move on to part 3, there was one audience member that had a question about, you know, where do you see, Dr. Say, where do you see this going long term when we are targeting tumors in people with NF1? A lot of the current treatment is looking at stabilizing tumors, or in some cases shrinking tumors. Where do you see us going from here long term?
So I think one of the things that we've realized that it's, you know, we're not treating the tumor per se, but we're actually treating the patient who's suffering because of this tumor. And I think that is a very important lesson that, you know, we've already known about. But I think, you know, when we're trying to get these medicines approved, what we're trying to see is, does it benefit the patient, and does it actually salvage the patient's vision? If it's an optic pathway tumor, if it's a plexiform tumor and it's causing a loss of neurologic function or a weakness in an arm or causing pain, does it result in improvement of pain, or does it help the patient move his arm better? So I think what we're trying to do in future clinical trials is, as opposed to just using MRI results to say that, you know, this drug works very well and shrinks the tumor, so this study is a success, we're also trying to define success differently by showing that it's actually benefiting patients, and which is actually the primary goal of all research. So I think that is one, you know, sort of philosophical difference between how we are trying to, you know, incorporate these outcome measures into clinical trials. And another thing is that, you know, I think what we're trying to do, like I mentioned before, is also that, you know, we're trying to convert some of these high-grade tumors or these malignant tumors, but even if we're not able to achieve shrinkage, if we can actually convert this into a chronic problem. So if we can actually prevent the tumor from growing for a long enough period of time, you know, we hope that the immune system can actually start taking over and start controlling the tumor, where you may not need to be on therapy anymore. So I think that is the hope with, you know, the novel strategies such as the ones using these oncolytic viruses or harnessing the power of the immune system, which we call immunotherapy, is that even if you took the medicine just for 6 months or for a year, we should be able to get what we call durable response. So a response that is not contingent on you continuing the medicine, but would continue for many, many years afterwards. And so I think this is another way that the research community is starting to think about patients with NF1, because we don't just want to treat you like any other cancer patient, because this is a disease that is going to have lifelong implications. And so even if we give you therapy that helps get rid of the cancer, there may be side effects from the medicine that might have lasting implications for patients with NF1.
I think that's a great transition to our next section of tonight's talk, where we talk more about the patient and patient advocates' role in research. I just want to remind everyone to keep your mics muted throughout this evening if you're not a presenter, as well as to avoid using any of the drawing functions on the slides. Thank you. I'm going to pass it on to Trace Ann now to introduce our next speaker.
Thank you, Kara, and thanks, Dr. Sate, for that very insightful presentation. So I'm Trace Ann Rose, I'm the Director of Patient Engagement at the Children's Tumor Foundation. And in this segment, I'd like to present the Ctf Patient Engagement Program, or Patient-Focused Drug Development Initiative. Patient-focused drug development is defined as a systematic approach to ensuring that patients' perspective, experiences, needs, and priorities are captured and meaningfully included in drug development and evaluation. The idea of, could you please mute your microphones? Thank you. The idea of involving patients at every step of drug development process has gained momentum in recent years. And patients are no longer just subjects of research, but partners and drivers of research. As you can imagine, making this an everyday reality is a significant challenge requiring collaboration among stakeholders. At CTF, we're united to end NF with patients as partners. We have built a patient engagement program uniting stakeholders across the research and development ecosystem and connecting with partners in basic translational clinical research, commercial, and regulators. This evening, I will share with you how the program was built and some of the activities patients have been involved with. First, I would like to introduce an important guest who I am very appreciative is here tonight. Wendy Slavitt is a health programs coordinator, health specialist with the patient affairs staff at the FDA. Ms. Slavitt is a public health professional who addresses health behavior through research, health communication, and health education. She earned her MPH from Emory University in Behavioral Science and Health Education and a BA from Tufts University in Psychology. She's a certified health education specialist. She possesses extensive experience collaborating with the federal government and the private sector. Ms. Slavitt has worked in the areas of tobacco regulation, tobacco prevention and cessation, mental health, substance abuse, cancer, diabetes prevention and management, HIV/AIDS education, workplace health, and maternal and child health. Wendy, welcome.
Thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Is that okay?
Sure, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I wanted to take a few minutes and talk to you about some of the work that we're doing at FDA and ways that patients can get more involved. So thank you very much for the great introduction, Trace Ann, and I will go ahead and start here. So just an outline of what I'm going to be talking about tonight. I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of the work that we do at FDA. I'll talk a little bit about patient engagement activities. I'll give you some resources that we have available, and then be able to answer some questions later. So FDA has really been involved with patients probably since about the 80s. You know, we understand that the patients really know best about what's going on with your condition and you know, what your needs are, what you would need in a treatment. So you know, we really value the patient opinion and patient and caregiver voice. So this is just a slide of some of the patient engagement activities over the years. Like I mentioned, it started in the 80s with the Office of AIDS Coordination. And over the years, it's really only gotten more and more active, the idea of patient engagement at the FDA. So the group that I am with is the patient affairs staff. We're a very small staff. We're actually only 5 people, and we are only a couple years old. The previous commissioner at the FDA decided that it was really important to have a central entry point into the agency where patients and patient communities could come and engage with us. So we lead the patient engagement activities across the FDA. So the cross-cutting programs and activities. We work with the drug center, the device center, the biologic center. So we have everyone sort of involved in different things that, that need to be discussed. We really facilitate public and private partnerships and collaborations. And we really are aiming to enhance the communications that are out there. We know that there's definitely a lot of information that's out there on the FDA website. And so we want to make sure that that you're getting the information that you need and reaching who you need to reach at the FDA. So a few of the initiatives that I wanted to speak to you about are our patient listening sessions, the FDA EMA Patient Engagement Cluster, our Patient Engagement Collaborative, and some of our new communications initiatives. So our patient listening sessions are a resource for the medical product centers to engage with patients and caregivers and their advocates on different issues. So one of the main topics that we have covered for our listening sessions are rare diseases. We have a memorandum of understanding with the National Organization for Rare Disorders, or NORD, and we use our patient listening sessions as a way to inform our regulatory decision-making, help the review staff learn a little bit more about different conditions and what patients are facing on a day-to-day. A lot of our scientists have spent time in the lab, but it's been a while since some of them have worked with patients. So it's really important to get the patient perspective. We have 2 types of listening sessions. We have some that are FDA requested. So sometimes some of the scientists will approach us and want to know a little bit more about a particular condition or a particular subpopulation of people within that condition. And then we also have patient requested listening sessions where a patient organization or community wants to share their experiences and perspectives with us. So, some of the things that happen during listening sessions is patients share about, things that are important to them and what they feel should be addressed, such as the disease burden, the symptom progression, what is most important in a treatment for their condition, as well as, what are they working to manage and what do they really need? So, we also discuss treatment options. As I mentioned, these are cross-cutting across the FDA, so we don't necessarily discuss specific drugs or very specific treatments, but what would patients want or need in potential treatment? What's most important? What symptoms are most important to try and decrease if possible? And we also use the information from the listening sessions to help inform clinical trials, to get an understanding of what are some of the barriers to participating in clinical trials and natural history studies, and how can we work better with patients to increase understanding and the importance of those types of activities. And also being able to design clinical studies that are really targeted toward patients and what's meaningful to patients as far as endpoints for the studies. So we actually, a little over a year ago, had a listening session with Children's Tumor Foundation on NF, and actually you're going to hear from Brianna a little bit after me, and she was one of the people that participated, and Tracy Ann was also there. So it was really nice. We had 6 patients and caregivers come to the FDA campus in Silver Spring, Maryland, and meet with us in person. And we had several scientists from across the FDA sit at the table. So for me, it's one of the things I really actually miss right now. Working at home is not getting to interact with patients directly, but I really learned a lot from the patients that were there, and I know the scientists that participated did too. Some of the things that we covered were symptoms, impact on daily living, some of the current management, treatment options, we learned a little bit more about your NF registry and talked a little bit about clinical trials. So one of our other initiatives is the European Medicines Agency. And the European Medicines Agency is actually kind of the equivalent of FDA for the European Union. And so we meet with them periodically and just talk about different activities that we're doing with patients, and they share things that they're doing. And it's just a great information sharing and ways to enhance engagement across the globe. One of our other initiatives is the Patient Engagement Collaborative, and otherwise known as the PEC. And this is a partnership that we have with the Clinical Trials Transformation Initiative, or CITI. And the PEC has 16 members currently, and we meet periodically to discuss things that are important to patients in medical product developments and regulatory discussions. And actually, we 8 of the members are going to finish their terms, and then we're going to be selecting 8 more. So we're going to have an application process that will probably be early in 2021. So keep everyone posted on that. And that's definitely one way to become involved. These are patients that can speak to a bunch of different conditions, as well as both as caregivers and as patients. We also have people that represent patient organizations. So one of the things we're doing with the PEC is that they really wanted to increase some of the communications and really make it easier for people to interact with the FDA. So we're in the process of developing some educational materials, and we're always looking for people to review some of the materials that we've created and get involved in that type of thing. So I encourage people that are interested to reach out to us, and I'll show you my email at the end. So one of the other initiatives we have are our Patients Matter video series. And this is our most recent one that was on expanded access. And this is Cooper, and Cooper's mom actually will be speaking to everyone soon, Kirsta, and they came and we put together a video about expanded access, and they were able to share firsthand their experiences with the expanded access program at FDA. So if you take a look at the videos, they're all actually on YouTube, in addition to be on the FDA website. And what they cover a variety of topics, natural history studies, clinical trials, expanded access, just ways to get involved with FDA. So, we're adding to this video series, and I encourage you to check it out. We're also working on our communications, as I mentioned. So our website is in the process of getting an overhaul. We actually have a few patients that we worked with who reviewed both the look and feel of the website and some of the content. So that's something that we're moving forward with. We also have a Twitter account, and I don't know how many of you follow us on Twitter, but I encourage you to do so. And our handle is at the bottom. And I just wanted to lastly just talk about a few different resources that we have. So this slide is a little bit busy, but basically the point of the slide is that the Office of the Commissioner really should be kind of a central hub, and patient affairs is within the Office of the Commissioner. So, we work with the Center for Biologics, the Center for Drugs, and the Center for Devices. Each of these 3 centers have their own patient engagement teams, but there's a lot of issues that cut across the 3 different centers. So patient affairs is really kind of your entryway and your bridge to other parts of FDA. So I encourage you, to reach out to us. I've also, added the direct information to some of the other centers. So, if you have questions about a drug or a device or a biologic, you can reach out to them directly. But if you're not sure who to reach out to, you can always just reach out to us. So another way to reach FDA is through our Patients Ask FDA platform, and you can request a meeting or put in a question that you have. So I encourage you to take a look at that and enter a question or meeting request if you have information you need. So we also have some resources for patients on COVID-19. The main FDA webpage has information related to coronavirus, but we realized that there's a lot of information on there, that a lot of the information on there is really more geared toward industry. So we wanted to have a hub for patients with just information specific for patients and caregivers, and also just consumers in general. So if you go to our main For Patients page, there's a button that you can click to look at the resource page for COVID-19 for patients. And this is our team here and all of our contact information. As I mentioned earlier, we're always looking to have more patient involvement, and want you to reach out to us with any questions or concerns that you have, and we're happy to either answer them or find someone who can answer them if we don't have an answer for you. So this is all of our contact information. We also, we want to keep in touch, so definitely let us know if you're interested in helping with future projects, and we'll put you on a list of patients to reach out to for the future projects that we need patient input on. So that's actually all I have. I don't know if we're going to do questions now.
I think we'll give a moment to see if we get a couple questions in on the chat about patient affairs at the FDA. Does anyone have any questions for Wendy?
So there's one here, Kara. Does FDA have a special protocol for review of off-label drugs for application in new conditions? For example, in COVID-19, many pre-existing approved drugs have found application in COVID.
So there is a process for that, and that's through our Center for Drugs. And so I'm not as aware of the process for that. So I would have to reach out to some of my colleagues in the Center for Drugs to find out more information for you.
I think that's it, right?
Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you so much, Wendy, for this presentation on the FDA. I learned a lot about ways that we can get a hold of different sections, and definitely going to add you guys on Twitter.
Okay, great. We always need more followers, so.
So thank you, Wendy, for all of your time and dedication. And I really can't thank you enough for allowing individuals like myself to share my story about neurofibromatosis and the need for cure. So my name is Brianna Warden, and I'm this year's ambassador for the Children's Tumor Foundation. I have a large plexiform neurofibroma that encompasses my entire left side, except my left leg. I've endured numerous surgeries, and I've survived 3 malignant peripheral nerve sheath tumors, or NPNST for short. And as of now, I am on a clinical trial for my Plexiform, mostly my left arm. So with the help of Wendy and CTF, I had the honor of being a patient representative, where I got to speak to the FDA twice now, actually. So being a part of the FDA workshops and listening sessions is extremely important and crucial to finding a cure for neurofibromatosis. We need researchers, doctors, scientists to understand that no 2 cases of neurofibromatosis are the same. We all have different reactions to this disorder, and we are going to have different reactions to the medications that come along with it, and that's why it's so hard to see what side effects we are all going to have. So some of us have different goals with NF, whether it's a decrease in pain, mobility, but it's the overall quality of life. So though it may be hard, I feel it's essential for patients to tell their stories so researchers have a better understanding of how they are impacted by NF as a whole. At these listening sessions, we were able to communicate sufficiently to a multitude of doctors and researchers. I genuinely believe we got their attention. We got to go to these workshops, and they were able to see firsthand how we feel on clinical studies, and they got to see us first in person, so we're not just a number on a piece of paper, and they got to realize this since we were sitting in front of them. We received positive feedback, and the FDA had many questions and seemed really engaged and interested. They want to help us, so we have to help them by explaining our stories. And again, I know that's very hard. Clinical studies, ultimately a cure for NF, are crucial to making life livable for not only myself, but the 2.5 million individuals who suffer from NF worldwide and have complications from NF. If patients like myself continue to work with the FDA, it will act as a catalyst or a bridge, and I truly believe we will find a cure. So thank you for all of your help. I truly appreciate it.
Thank you, Brianna, for being an amazing ambassador and such a great advocate. And it was really a joy and pleasure for us to participate in the listening session at the FDA and also the other opportunities that we've had. I mean, I was so impressed by how easy it was to really work with the FDA and how accommodating they are and how responsive they are. So truly, when Wendy says, if you have questions or you'd like to participate in any of their initiatives, please feel free to reach out, and I can assure you that, you know, you will hear back from them. Okay, so as promised earlier, I would like to share with you a bit more about the CTF's patient engagement program. You know, like I said, the focus of patient-focused drug development is really to incorporate the voice of the patients to help to accelerate drug development for NF. And the way we're doing that is by empowering patients and catalyzing their involvement in the research that we're involved with. And how have we done that? So we've really had some big wins in the past 3 years. We established a patient engagement training program. And, you know, you can find that the course is online at www.ctf.org, patient engagement. And we identified patient education and training as vital if patients are to play a central role in research and development. And CTF trains patients to confidently partner with researchers, industry, regulators, and others in the medicine research and development space. Our training program is online and is designed to provide you with the information to understand all subtypes of NF, drug discovery process, and the drug discovery process that requires you to bring treatments to patients. The program is a blend of online reading materials and educational videos designed around 10 courses for about 2.5 hours of learning. So that is one of the main entry points for our program, for patient engagement program. And then we have a whole host of different activities that we get involved with, like, you know, Wendy and Brianna talked about the listening session that was held at the FDA. I mean, can't speak more highly about that. There's also the outcome of that listening session is a document that was written and lives on the FDA's website, and you can also find that on the CTF's website and on the FDA website. Patients are also active members of AstraZeneca's Pharma Advisory Board. Now, the first FDA-approved drug for Plexiform NF in pediatric patients, Kosologo, and you know, one of those patient advocates will speak about their experience tonight, so I won't say much more about that, other than, you know, CTF is really the facilitator in connecting patients with stakeholders, you know, across research, clinical, pharma, and regulators. Patients are also evaluators of the CTF grant or CTF grant application programs. So, or Young Investigator Award programs or Drug Discovery Initiative programs, we do involve patients' input there as well. We're also global. You know, there is CTF Europe, but beyond that, we're also involved in different projects and working groups to help us determine best practices for successful patient engagement in research studies. So like I mentioned earlier, you know, the patient engagement space is, you know, it's a few years old, but we're still learning, it's still evolving. And so, you know, we're happy to be a part of that process in helping to create tools and determine best practices for how patients start to meaningfully engage with drug development. So how did we do it? So one of the first things that we did was to look across our organization and create a culture of patient centricity, and also expand externally as well with our other collaborators. So researchers, scientists, and pharma relations. And the idea really was to sustain an incorporation of patients' experience in drug development and decision making, and to really make it a standard practice. So pretty much in everything we do, even beyond our patient engagement program, even our volunteer leadership council, we're always involving patients and volunteers in what we do. Like I mentioned, we established a patient engagement training program that equips patients to really meaningfully understand how to give that input and how to share their stories. And CTF has become a connector for patients, like I mentioned already, between researchers, clinicians, industrial regulators, and patients. And like I mentioned earlier too, is that it is very difficult, to make that transition to now, okay, patients' input is valued, it's important, it needs to be a part of, the entire ecosystem. And so CTF, again, as a connector, as a facilitator, we're training the patients, we're getting them ready, and we're helping the process. And so now I think that we have such a recognized program in the rare disease space and beyond as well, that we're being asked for patients to get involved, which is a wonderful thing. So, I mean, this chart here really highlights the increase in patient involvement over time. Certainly, this was a new space for me as well, and so I've evolved with the program, and it's becoming more active now. But when we started, we really, like I said, we looked at our programs and determined how could we make them more patient-centric. And at the time, it was primarily our research award programs or grant programs. And you can see how that grew over 3 years to now. In 2020, we have patients being on advisory boards with pharmaceutical companies, patients going to the FDA, patients being involved with our registry, patients as reviewing our grant or grant applications for funding. So it's really been a wonderful thing for our patient community and also for our organization to have patients setting the priorities, not just for our funding and research, but also for our clinical care as well. And again, just to elaborate a bit more on, those engagement activities. So when you think about like early stage of clinical development, this is where the collaboration with FDA comes in, where we're helping the agency to understand, what impacts and burden of the disease and burden of treatment matters most to patient and how they can be measured, right? And I think, make no mistake, I think this was very instrumental, the listening session and workshop that we did, in the FDA understanding by the time Cellumetnib was submitted for approval, in them understanding what NF is and what a priority it was for patients. So Wendy, you can look out for me to maybe email you to have another listening session or two on the other subgroups of NF, because there definitely is NF2 and schwannomatosis that we want to call attention to as well. In terms of plan and conduct of clinical trials, one of our patient advocates will talk about RAINS, but we love to collaborate with other groups as well and fund where we can. And CTF has been a great supporter of the RAINS response evaluation in neurofibromatosis and schwannomatosis group, and that is an international collaboration of researchers and clinicians, and they're really working to develop specific endpoints for clinical trials that will support effectiveness in drug application and sort of patient-reported outcomes as well. And I'm a part of that. And one of the latest things that we're doing is that, RAINS and CTF, we're collaborating on our patient training program that all of our advocates can be more knowledgeable about how to give that input. We're also involved in global projects working to design metrics for successful patient engagement in research studies. I was personally involved with Paradigm, which is a European group that is working on best practices for involving patients in design of clinical trials. Also another project, EU Pearl, some of you on this call too may have helped recently in a survey at Delphi, where we were looking to rank the priority of manifestations for designing future clinical trials. And that was an interesting project. There was definitely some learnings from that as well. And we'll continue to do more of this. In terms of research funding priorities, this has been, one of the first areas that we touched at the foundation, where we invited patients to sit on the panel with experts as well in reviewing our grant applications, just really to determine whether, is this idea or, is this research that you're proposing really a high priority for patients, right? And we do value their input, and Shannon McNall will comment on that later as well. Patients are also recently this year are now members of our clinical care advisory board, and they're helping us to evaluate the criteria for NF clinics requesting to join the network. And so again, just to to emphasize here that we've really made this a culture at CTF to have patients across all of our programs. Or NF Clinic Network. Patients are involved in identification of patient needs to prioritize clinical projects. And we do have, Kate's not on the call tonight, but Kate is our patient support coordinator. We do have an Ask Kate YouTube video series, but she's the person that, should you have questions relating to NF, she'll do her best to answer. You can always reach out to her. But she puts out some really great educational videos to discuss experiences and provide support to other individuals with NF. And a lot of this is also driven by questions that she receives from patients. We have patients review patient educational materials as well. And Wendy, because our patients are so adept with this, would love to help review those training materials that the FDA is putting out as well. And in terms of pharma engagement, I alluded to some of that before, but we're collaborating more with pharma to help them understand how to best communicate information to patients and prescribers. So in conclusion, I think the CTF patient engagement model has been very successful. And in fact, one of my visions for the program is really to create this program for CTF that can really be a great benchmark and best practice for rare diseases. And so some of the benefits of involving patient advocates in the research process is that, they can help develop studies with patients' perspective and experiences in mind. They can help determine what aspects of trials can be better tailored to meet the needs of patients who might participate in trial, help define endpoints that are relevant to the patient population, collaborate effectively with regulators and legislative groups to advance funding for and/or treatments for NF. And I do know that through our Volunteer Leadership Council as well, we help to prepare patients and identify opportunities for them to engage in advocacy. They can help, with recruitment of research studies. And this one is really really important, because a lot of times, and, I'm not putting on a clinical hat here, but I just happen to know that a lot of times, some trials may fail because they don't, get sufficient patients, right? So there's a recruitment issue. And sometimes it has to do with the design of the trials. So I think that, here patients can be so valuable in, helping researchers in designing those trials that will better accommodate the needs of patients, right? Even access to get into these trials. And really, I think by sharing their stories, especially, I've had some recent experiences with pharma, and just that feedback about the patients sharing their stories and helping them to understand that patient journey and understand better that patient experience, right? We can never take it for granted that, they understand truly what NF is. Like Brianna said, everyone's experience is different. And so it's so important for us to tell our stories. So I'm saying thank you, but I'm really turning this over to another group of very important patient advocates that are here tonight that are better equipped to really tell you about their experiences and, what it means for them to be involved and really why it's so important. So I'm going to turn it over to Shannon McNall to really just share your experience as a patient advocate, and then after Shannon, Bill, then Rainey, Kirsta, and Greg.
Hi, everybody. My name is Shannon McNall. I am from Idaho, and I have gone through the amazing patient engagement training. I loved it. It really prepared me to feel like I can be a stronger advocate. I have NF1, and my son, who is 13, also has NF1. And I started volunteering for the Children's Tumor Foundation, I think because it was a way for me to deal with my anxiety, to make my anxiety about NF channel in a more positive way by being able to volunteer. And this patient engagement program has really been important to me because it's just, I've excelled. I mean, I feel like I've done so much better since going through the training. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about grants. So when I look back and I would think about grants and like actually reviewing a grant, I was super intimidated by that process. I mean, here we are giving input that is going to impact research. It's going to make a difference. And I wasn't sure that I was prepared to give that input. And I went through the training and I did it a couple of times and I suddenly felt super comfortable. It wasn't that I was giving input, it's that I got to give input. I got to give input as somebody who has NF, as somebody who lives with it every single day, and as somebody whose kid lives with it every single day as well. And knowing that the Children's Tumor Foundation allows patients to be able to have a say in the research that's going to happen makes a huge, huge difference. I would definitely say that if you're looking at the grant process, I would definitely give it a try, and I definitely apply and go through their training program. You're not looking at a 50-page medical terminology paper that you have to pull out a dictionary for. You're looking at, as a patient advocate, you're looking at really a summary that's pretty easy to understand, and you get to give your opinions and your input back about those studies. So I definitely think if you want to look at the
Thank you, Shannon. Do you want to comment maybe on your, because we have a little more time, do you want to maybe comment on your advocacy experience on the Hill?
Oh yeah, and we go out. Being an advocate on Capitol Hill is quite amazing. If you guys look at doing that for the Children's Tumor Foundation, it's super simple to talk to your representatives. Don't be afraid of them. I think a lot of people are afraid to talk to their representatives. They are just people and they want to hear what you have to say. And I mean, I was scared the first time I went out there, but once I started talking to them and realizing that they're just people and that they want to make a difference and they want to really help us in our causes, it was great.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Shannon. Bill?
Hi, everybody. I want to add my welcome to all of you that have joined the NF Forum tonight. My name's Bill Ryder. I'm a schwannomatosis patient whose confirming tumor was removed at the age of 23. I was finally diagnosed at 48 and am now 65. I am also the parent of a schwannomatosis patient. The 25 years between my first tumor removal and my diagnosis was very difficult. That's why I think it's so important that we as patients and caregivers participate in the patient engagement program and help educate others, because it's difficult to be diagnosed and receive proper treatment of NF outside of the clinic network. Specialty doctors and researchers need our help to continue to improve knowledge and treatment options. I worked with grant review, training, and with the new NF Registry. And Shannon did a great job in talking about grant review. So I'd like to discuss training and the new NF Registry. The 12 training courses help to educate us as patient advocates. As patients and caregivers of patients, the trainings help us interact with researchers and their projects, drug companies, and doctors. Some of the classes include neurofibromatosis education, research concepts, clinical trials, lay abstracts, and FDA drug approval. So I can assure you that our input is important, is listened to, and is respected. So I would urge those of you to contact Trace Ann and get involved with the patient engagement program. This is one of the projects that will help end NF. The second area I was asked to discuss was the new NF Registry. For those of you who put your information in the original registry, all of your information was moved over. The registry was started in 2012 and currently has over 9,000 participants. A small percentage of the known NF1, NF2, and schwannomatosis patients in the world. As Brianna said, over 2.5 million people around the world are affected with NF1, NF2, and schwannomatosis. I tested the new registry back in June, and I found the questions to be clear, concise, and easy to understand, both for potential patients and caregivers. So even if you are currently in the registry, I would urge you to update your information and review the questions, since NF and its effects are constantly under observation and things constantly change. So quickly, why join the registry and what are the benefits? It's to keep the community informed of NF updates, let researchers have access to accurate information from a large group of patients, to allow us to get involved with potential new treatments and clinical trials, and it's a way to be active in the NF community. Only projects approved for research by CTF get access to the information in the registry. Your personal information is never disclosed, only patterns and trends. So I want to thank you for giving me a few minutes of your time tonight, and best wishes as we work to end NF. I am going to put the registry link in the chat after I'm done speaking. So thank you, and thank you Trace Ann, for allowing me to participate.
Thank you, Bill. Rainey?
Hi, looking for the video. I don't know if it's started yet, but that's my still, everybody. I'm not able to start my video for you all to see me right now. Maybe somebody from CTF can help out with that, but I think everybody can hear me at this point. Here we go. Hi, everybody. Hello from Birmingham, Alabama. My name is Renee Moss, and I am the mother of 2 children with neurofibromatosis and my husband who has neurofibromatosis. We're a little bit more out of the norm, and I think it's important to know that's how I got involved in the patient engagement piece of what we're talking about tonight. Our son was diagnosed with NF when he was about 6 years old. He had a large plexiform tumor that was discovered in his neck that was at first thought to be a swollen lymph node. So that was our first experience with NF, as he was 6 years old. Our daughter was diagnosed the next year. At the time, she was 4 years old. And as a result of both of our children being diagnosed, my husband discovered he had NF at age 36. So I think we have 3 different, very, very different presentations of NF1 in our family, which I think is a real piece of what I advocate for in our patient engagement with both clinicians and our involvement with other things that I just want to go over a little bit about what my experience has been with the patient engagement. Our son is a very successful participant in the Cellumetnib trial. His tumor has shrunk a total of just over 60%, which is great. But what we have learned in our clinical trial experience is, no offense to our friends at the FDA, but tumor shrinkage is not enough to get an FDA approval. So through our clinical trial experience, I was really educated on what outcomes are and how clinical trials are designed in order to show the maximum impact to the patients that those trials are seeking to serve. So instead of just, great, we no longer have a very visible tumor, it was very, very important for us to be able to explain to the researchers the airway improvement that our son was having. that swallowing was no longer an issue, that sleep was improving. And then even the psychosocial piece, which I think was a really unique thing. Our son started the drug trial in 4th grade. And he came home from school that first week of 5th grade. And if you have boys, maybe you have this experience. Around that time, my son just emotionally shut down and doesn't really share a lot. But he just came home, grabbed a snack and said, "Hey, Mom, nobody asked me what's wrong with my neck anymore." And he just kind of walked down the hall. And that was just a very powerful moment for me, that this isn't just about clinical improvement. We really are working to communicate to researchers and those that are responsible for designing these trials, and ultimately what we hope the FDA will approve in some of these successful drug trials, that it's psychosocial as well, and that mental health is also just as important with our young people and adults as they go through life with neurofibromatosis. So that was our clinical trial experience. And I've been involved with Children's Tumor Foundation since 2013, which was the first time that Children's Tumor Foundation came near here in Birmingham. We drove to Nashville to attend our first conference. That's where I met Trace-Ann, and she's family along with everybody else. And so Trace-Ann has helped me become a better patient representative. I've gone through a lot of the training that CTF has done, as well as other things. So one of the main things I'm involved in is the RAINS Consortium, and I call it RAINS, and I always have to look it up to see what RAINS really stands for, but that's the Response Evaluation in Neurofibromatosis and Schwannomatosis. Originally, this was a group of clinical researchers and researchers that were responsible for basically brainstorming and coming up with different potential trials or things that would benefit the patients. And several years ago, they started to involve patients. So I'm one of a few patient representatives, and we're hoping to grow this group. So if you're interested, reach out to me and I'll make sure that we know what channels publicly to be able to communicate with you. But our job is to work with the working groups, functional outcomes, cutaneous neurofibromas, imaging, patient-reported outcomes, just a few of the different working groups, where researchers will come together. And we've been doing Zoom calls way longer than COVID. This is kind of how we all connect across different spaces. And we give them feedback on different measurements. For example, it may be a pain quality of life, or a pain scale, or a disfigurement or deformity. What words are the appropriate thing? What is it that patients want to understand? And are they going to be able to effectively communicate how the impact of some of those studies are benefiting them or changing their life, hopefully for the better? So that's what RAINS has done. It could be everything from a measurement in terms of different handheld strength tools, in terms of understanding, is your strength improved after a drug trial or some different therapies, or it could be really be psychosocial improvements in understanding some of the learning disabilities or the cognitive disabilities and improvements that may be beneficial to children and adults. So that's been my experience with RAINS for several years, and I've really enjoyed that and feel as Shannon said, it's sort of like my free therapy. It's the only control I have right now, and that is to share my experience as a caregiver with the researchers that I'm entrusting to end NF in our lifetime. And that really is what I always say. I'm trusting everybody to end NF in my children's lifetime. So other than RAINS, I've also participated in AstraZeneca's patient engagement focus groups a couple of times. I know the drug is now FDA approved, but our son actually participated. And now that it's FDA approved, I can share a little bit about what that was involving. So if you're prescribed Koselugo, there's a patient kit that you may receive. What went in that patient kit was developed by some of the focus groups. So those that were experienced with Cellumetnib, that may have dealt with some of the side effects like the rash, or if you have a nail bed infection, what was beneficial in maybe heading that off? Maybe your stomach was uncomfortable, or you had some abdominal discomfort. So maybe some antacids or some things like that, the non-prescription things that may be needed in those first weeks or so are in there. The wording for when is it appropriate to reach out for your medical team, what to expect. A lot of that was developed with input from my now 15-year-old son last year and the year and a half ago, along with some of the other patients who said, no, this is really important. Move that up. This needs to be in bold. Put a box around that. This is what has been the primary thing. So really, really engaged dialogue and experiences of the patients help develop things. And it's kind of a proud moment for me to know that my son helped design that. And a really proud moment to know that others are benefiting from that drug in the way that we have, literally around the country, and my prayer is soon around the world. The other thing that I was involved in most recently, and I'll just end with this, is that I was on a listening session for the FDA oncology group about how COVID is affecting clinical trial experiences. So this was a consortium of rare disease families or patients. So it wasn't just an NF event. There was a very significant rare cancer. We represented kind of an NF family, and there were two others where we talked about the gap in access to the care that is important to receive during the clinical trial. And, you know, the anxiety that we were hearing from the research team of how much can they lessen or apply for things during COVID without jeopardizing the trial. Some of those things that were really discussed. So it was really interesting for me to hear from the oncology working group of FDA about what's important to them. I really do feel that we were heard, whether it was travel restrictions that prevented people accessing important measurements during their trial experience that were missed. What is telemedicine? And I've seen some of the things in the group chat talk about telemedicine. We had a telemedicine visit with our research nurse practitioner in April because we were unable to go to Bethesda for our son's 5.5-year review on the MEK inhibitor, for example. So that was a really interesting experience for us. And I am hopeful that some of our feedback can help inform the FDA in terms of policies and procedures in this COVID culture we're living in, that in some of the parts of the country like ours don't seem to be letting up anytime soon. So what is the new normal to be sure that we don't lose any ground with some of these trials and the research that are important? So I'll continue to be involved. I think one of the things that I'm very passionate about is seeing more diversity and the patient engagement sphere and the patient representatives. I'm not from a very diverse community, as you can probably tell, but I think it's incredibly important that we have more representatives in the NF2 and schwannomatosis sphere, as well as other races, ethnicities, and socioeconomic backgrounds that are contributing to that. So that's something I'm very passionate about. I know that those on RAINS share that as well. So if you're interested in becoming a patient representative in various spheres that have been discussed tonight, Tracy Ann and others were all willing to help, and looking forward to getting to know more of you in that sphere as we all work to end NF in our lifetime. Thank you.
Thank you, Rainey. Great talk. Krista, we're coming up on 9, so.
Okay, I promise to talk fast. So I'm Kirsta. My son Cooper is 8 years old. He was diagnosed with NF1 with Plexiform Neurofibroma when he was 4 years old. And I'll just talk briefly about 2 of our patient engagement opportunities that we've had recently. As Wendy mentioned, we were fortunate last year. Our family traveled to the FDA and helped out with creating a patient education video specifically about the Expanded Access Program. The Expanded Access Program is how we were able to get treatment for Cooper's Plexiform neurofibroma. And the FDA staff, as you've heard already, they were very warm and welcoming and just made it an incredible experience for our family. So, you know, by sharing Cooper's story, obviously one of the goals was to help other parents understand and medical providers understand what is the Expanded Access Program, to allow patients to have access to medications that are pending FDA approval. The other, I think, really amazing opportunity that we had was to educate those medical professionals that would see it as well as others about what is NF. And, you know, anytime we can increase awareness, it's a great thing. Really, I think what's been most effective and helpful for our process has been sharing a personal connection with those that we speak to. It helps them to understand NF, but also, like Brianna said, it also helps them to see us as individuals. We're not just statistics, or, you know, our children aren't just children with a rare disease. So that personal connection has been really helpful, I think, in advancing education about NF and awareness. And just as a side note, the FDA video was especially awesome for our son Cooper because he could say that he was officially a YouTube star, at least for a few days. So that was pretty great. The second experience that Trace-Ann referred to is we've been fortunate to serve on an advisory board, my husband and I both, with pharmaceutical company, and talking to the pharmaceutical staff about, again, our family story and Cooper's story. And our goal is to really paint a picture of what is it like to be an 8-year-old living in a world with NF1. And, you know, we have a lot of really open, honest conversations about what our challenges are. I know all of you on the line have had challenges, and we do our very best to help identify unmet needs of NF patients. And in our experience, the pharmaceutical staff they're passionate and they're driven to improve quality of life for NF patients. And they are so appreciative of hearing from patients and caregivers about how they can help. So it's been just an incredibly positive experience for us. And I said I'd talk quickly, which I did, but I'll just leave with a couple of thoughts. Patient and caregiver voices matter. I know you've heard that, but it really can make a difference when you share your story or the story of your loved one. And while we can't control NF, and for our family, we don't know what the future holds for Cooper, through patient engagement, we really feel like we can help those who can make a difference for Cooper and all of our NF heroes so that we can, as Rini said, end NF in our children's lifetime. So thank you.
Are you ready for me, Trace-Ann?
Yes, please go ahead, Greg.
Yeah. I just want to make sure I'm good to go here. Well, I'm gonna tie this up pretty quickly here because I hate to follow all of these great speakers and be the one to tie this up. But my name is Greg Erickson. I'm from Minnesota. The reason that I am involved with the NF community is I have an 8-year-old son with NF1. He is my inspiration and the reason that I am what I call a dadvocate for NF. And then in addition to that, all the other people that I've met along the way, people that we're listening to talk on this very chat tonight. And in fact, I'm reading a lot of these questions over on the side on the Zoom group chat. And so
Greg, you're in mute.
I muted. How far did you lose me?
You're reading the messages on Zoom.
Yes, so the message is on Zoom. So I want these people to understand that this is what this is all about, right? I mean, there's some awesome questions coming out of this. And I love that. So I'll just briefly jump into the Department of Defense's Neurofibromatosis research program, which was kind of my charge to talk about. My wife and I have been participants in that program since 2015 through the NF network. And this is a program that's been run efficiently through the DoD since 1996 through the Army Medical Research and Material Command. And this offers cutting-edge awards through a competitive 2-tiered peer review process to fill gaps in ongoing research. So we talk about what Shannon talked about, what Rini talked about, having this input that we're able to have. So we go and we ask for this money from the federal government, which is not in the budget. It's added by Congress, and we get that money, and hopefully we get it again here in fiscal year 20. And then we go through this peer review process. And so that's when we have the opportunity as an advocate to go in and say, hey, we get to help guide where this research money is going. And it's an empowering experience. And it really does give you the feeling that you have a say. And so for all of these individuals that are typing in the chat, get involved. Your voice is important, especially in a rare disease like neurofibromatosis, and especially now with COVID going on. We've NF does not stop because COVID stopped or because COVID is here. And so really, I just wanted to take a quick moment, tell you kind of a 10,000 foot quick overview of what the Army's NFRP program is. And thank you to Tracy and all the crew at CTF for putting this on. I think this is just awesome. I love all of these questions. Get involved. Your voice does matter. And thank you to everybody for participating in this.
Thank you, Greg, and to all the patient advocates and speakers who presented tonight. You know, it's truly such a special occasion. And again, you know, we couldn't have had this talk without, you know, including your voices. And over to Karen, Simon.
I just want to, I also thank all of our patient advocates, Brianna, Shannon, Bill, Rainey, Kirsta, and the dadvocate, Greg. We all play a role in fighting NF and hopefully ending NF within our lifetimes, but the most important role is played by the patients and their advocates. So thank you so much for taking the time this evening to share your story. And for anyone who's participating, I think we would all appreciate if you could thank our patient advocate speakers in the chat while I hand this off to Simon to wrap things up and give you guys a little bit of information about the next event.
Thank you, Kara. And thank you, Kara, especially, and to Samir and to Wendy and our friends at the FDA for this great webinar that you put on for us tonight. I think, you know, to be able to hear the progress that's taking place is so inspirational and provides a lot of hope. I know for the patients and for everyone else who's listening. And we're going to hear about more of that again next month in the fourth and last of this series of forum events. Although I'll have to say we've been getting a couple hundred people at each of these, so I wouldn't be surprised, Tracy, and if we just keep going, I think we should. So we'll certainly look at that. There's a lot of great topics that need to be covered. You know, there was something in the chat that someone posted about how they spoke to their insurance company today. And their contact didn't know what NF is. So we clearly, our work is not done. And it's events like this that I think hopefully inspire you to go out, as Greg said, our dadvocate friend, to go out and make some noise about NF and share what we need to know. I do want to tag on to what Greg said about the NFRP. Because of work from people like Greg and a lot of you on the call, we're happy to announce that so far the House, last 5-6 years, we've been getting $15 million a year for NF research to that program. But because of advocacy work through a lot of you folks, we asked for $20 million this year, and the House approved it. So it's making its way through, you know, those fancy things going on the Hill in DC, and we're hopeful that that will happen. Again, a thank you to our, as Kara said, our speakers tonight, Brianna, Shannon, Bill, Kirsta, Rini, and Greg. Please join us next month on September 17 for a very relevant topic, we think, related to school, which I'm sure a lot of you folks are dealing with at the moment, for better or for worse. It's obviously a very challenging time, so we hope you will find that talk very helpful. You can register, see that URL at the bottom, ctf.org/nfforum, or if that's too long to remember, just ctf.org. And you can find that information. Again, a big thank you to our supporters for this event, particularly AstraZeneca for their financial support, our huge collaboration here with NYU Langone Health, as well as our partners MSK Kids, Memorial Sloan Kettering, and Weill Cornell Medicine. Thank you to all of you for being with us tonight and for staying with us, even as we went over a little bit. To learn more about the foundation and all the work we're doing, ctf.org. And if you want to reach out to us or reach out to anyone who is on tonight's call, email us at info@ctf.org and we will make that connection for you.